Welcome to Innovator Café, the entrepreneur go-to, with your host, attorney Dave Stevens. Through each episode, Dave and his guests provide resources and assurances to build a company growth roadmap. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and the website stevenslawgroup.com. Now here's the host of Innovator Café, Dave Stevens.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Innovator Café. Today we are really blessed and lucky to have Laura Merling as a guest. Laura, I could go into your background. It's so vast and evolutionary. I could probably talk the whole time on that. So how about if you give us the Reader's Digest version about what you've accomplished in the recent history and your background and what you're thinking about today.
Yeah, no, thank you. Happy to be here. Gosh, when we first met, right? I think that was many moons ago. I was at Ford, but to just take the Wayback Machine for a minute. So the last probably 25, 30 years have always been about transformation. And it's interesting because at the time we didn't call it that. When I was going to university, I was spending time at Ford putting electronic medical records into production facilities. So I'm going to date myself here, but that was in the 80s. And think about where we are now with electronic medical records and what we were trying to do in the 80s. That tells you transformation's been in my blood since day one.
Okay.
Did that again at Pepsi, trying to do 10x, making Pepsi 10 times better than it was. And it was all about efficiency, operational efficiency, and using Palm Pilots and handheld devices. So it's always been at the convergence of technology and business change, right? So how do you change, grow your business or make it more efficient? And that's just been my career. And it's everything from CPG to automotive, aerospace, telecom, and then most recently, I was at a bank, so in financial services. So lots of breadth and depth across transformation in different industries.
Yeah, and I think the buzz now, and I know you've been deeply involved in this, is really digital transformation, right? And it means different things to different people. AI, ML, I mean, it becomes marketing words after a while, But let's talk about what transformation is happening right now. What's big and what do people really need right now?
Yeah, well, of course, right? AI is the hot ticket, and you could say generative AI for that matter. And I think what makes generative AI interesting to everyone right now is its accessibility, right? So if you think over time about where we've come with data, access to data, and then what you can do with it, it used to have to be your IT person in the back office that had to go, pull data out and then run reports, and just even back to reports and then data and analytics. And with generative AI, the tools and technology are accessible to everyone, right? I can just go log into Gemini, or I can go log into ChatGPT, and I can actually start doing stuff with it today. And I think that's it, is what can you do, and then what's useful with what you're doing, and how does that apply to a broader business versus, I might use it to, I use it to actually write an outline for me for a book, right? I also used it as I was trying to rewrite somebody's bio to make it interesting, like put a little interesting twist on it, and ran it through there. And they were like, "Oh, that was really good." And I'm like, "Yeah, well, Gemini did that, not me."
Yeah.
But when you think about it in the business context, it becomes a bit more challenging still. And that's, I think, the one thing is everybody's trying to figure out with AI and with generative AI, where the value is in their business and how they get it out. And I think the biggest challenge with that is, where is their data? Do they have access to it? Is it real time? Is it clean data, right? What's the quality of that data? So there's still some challenges that I think people are struggling with in terms of how to get the value out of it.
Yeah, well, and also data, we won't get into the legal side of these things, but people are loath to share their data into the abyss, right?
Yeah, well, both personal as individuals, we don't want to share our data into the
Sure.
abyss because we see what's happening relative to fraud more broadly,
Well,
right?
that's it, right?
Even,
Mhm.
what can happen with the images of us in terms of fraud. But I think from a corporation perspective, it's yeah, what information about my company is out there, trade secrets that might be out in the wild or being combined with those data sets. And that's where trying to get to that grounded data set and understanding how that structure works. Every company that does sort of large language models plus, using your data internally, they have different ways that they do that. And so it's
Mhm.
sure that you're using it in a, say, secure way. And that's every one of them does it a little different. And so it's making sure you understand the process.
Sure, sure. Well, and with your background, you've dealt with sensitive data issues in so many different industries. And what's unique about ChatGTP is that let's say that you load in with confidence and then with some security your data. They're not like openly sharing your data necessarily, right? But if they have that data and they use it to find, say, the same data indirectly, because stuff is hard to find. It's not always like a Google search just gives you everything, right? Trade secrets are things, they're not always locked in the database underground bunker. I mean, people, that image is just, I mean, unless you're in the military, it's not really fair, right? Your data can leak out indirectly as a result of using your data, maybe as you think securely in specific applications, right?
Yeah, so it's really understanding how that data is getting used or merged, or is it fully being done as a separate data set? Now it's still being used to train a data set, right? So you do have to be
Right.
cautious there of how that data set or how that model gets shared back or gets adjusted. I think on the kind of another aspect of it too is what data got used to create whatever model it is. Like if I use a bunch of data that's not accurate to then go create, even in a large language model, if you use if 80% of your data is not accurate, or if it's just pulled from generic data, you might not be getting stuff that's really what you want as the outcome or the
Sure.
answer. So it's both kind of you putting your stuff out there and then maybe having it escape into the wild. But separately, there's then the what got used to generate the context at which it's creating for you in terms of the
Mhm.
output. So it's both sides of it that you want to make sure you kind of consider. That's why they always say, even with Chat GPT, right? It's kind of that human in the loop. You still need to go back and look at it and review it and look at the context of it and the quality of it and make sure that it's really what you want it to be.
Well, right. Yeah, and so if I came to you for advice on a topic, right, and I said, this is what I'm looking for, give me the answer. And if I don't inform you, you can't give me very good advice. ChatGPT, they're no different, right? I mean, you
Right.
need to load the data to get meaningful results.
Yeah. And then checking and validating the accuracy of that data, right? I mean,
Right.
so the bank that I just left, we were actually using generative AI to then I'll say kind of our data steward role. And so it was, how do you
Hmm.
actually label each of the new data sets, right? What is it? What is the column header? What type of data is this?
Right.
And you got pretty accurate. I think we got in the 78% accuracy, which is pretty good, but it's
Yeah.
still 78%, right? Now, if a
Yeah.
person did it, you're probably going to get closer to, 95%, right? Maybe
Right.
higher. But you're still going to have always some room for error, but you want to
Mhm.
make sure that you're going back and validating and verifying and checking and retraining and educating so that it's a constant improvement process. As you get more data, you constantly have to go back and revalidate. I mean, we are also looking at that around fraud. Fraud changes so much. If you're trying to use data, just even in
Sure.
traditional AI, there's so much work that you need to do because the more you learn, the more the more fraudsters are learning, right? So it's a
Right.
constant education and retraining of that model.
Right. Fraud is a really good example, because it's this ongoing battle. It's always it's like an arms race, right?
Yes.
The more you fight them, the more they learn from you. Right?
Exactly. Well,
Yeah.
and then they try a different path, right?
Right.
They're
Right.
always looking for that hole. So
Yeah. And banks, for example, they also want to be convenient, right? So it opens up risk. And it's that, again, it's that constant battle,
yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly.
What other industries? I mean, you've worked in very deeply for many years in digital transformation. Many of these companies are old, crusty companies. Forget about accuracy of data; it's on paper practically, right? I mean, there are
Pretty
industries that
much.
are doing very well right now. I mean, really big American international companies too that are really behind.
There's a lot more paper out there in the world and manual processes than I think people realize,
Yeah,
or um, they might realize it, but maybe there's acknowledging it as part of how you run your business. I mean, and it's in every industry, and it's usually in that back office operations thing that it was much
right.
easier to handle it manually, and you had a process in place. And how do you now automate that process? And then what skill set do you need to give those people that you're now displacing because you've automated that process?
Sure.
So there's a whole value chain of thought that needs to go into it, but there's still a lot of paper out there. And
Yeah,
across every industry, automotive, aerospace, telecom, there's still paper.
grocery, I mean, large chains, right? And what's important to them? Having that bright, shiny red apple displayed with the right price,
Right.
And this is a lot of manual work. Like, well, we want to digitize this. Well, that your computer doesn't put my shiny apple on the shelf, right? And it really is priorities.
Yeah, and I mean, and some things are so it's interesting. Some things are so near and some things are so far, and it depends on the application and the volume. So
Yeah,
I'll give you an example. I had a speaker come and present last year and talking about the use of artificial intelligence to, you're going to laugh at this, but identify a cow. So just like we have a digital image, cows
right,
also have unique digital images, as do other animals. So this model of using AI for facial recognition, I'll say, of an
right,
animal was originally started to use in Africa. And part of it was actually used. So when you think about animals that are extinct or being hunted that you don't want to be hunted, and then you're compensating local communities to take care of them, you want to track how many there are in that local community, and you don't want to double count it. Um,
hmm
so it got used there, and now it's starting to be used to track cattle, right? And how many cattle do you have? And why is that important? Because when you think down the actual food chain, people are getting paid based upon how many cows they have and what the production is going to be from those cows and blah, blah, blah.
hmm
So it's, it's interesting to think now those are volumes, but they're not huge volumes. Like how many times am I going to put an apple? Couldn't it recognize an apple and the type of apple and the
right,
price of the apple if I just put it in front of a scanner and set it on the, on the counter, I'll call it on the self-serve counter in the
right,
grocery
right.
store. So why do I need the barcode? Right. So we're far away. It's based on volumes, patience, ability to recognize it. There's a whole, and the cost of doing it too, right?
Sure.
The cost of doing that at scale, at volume, just it becomes astronomical. So that's the other part, right? Is the compute power that's needed to do all of this. And then you've got efficiency around that compute power, and then you've got the cost of energy. It all kind of
And what's the payback?
exactly
Really? I mean, what value are you delivering? Here's a bunch of data that they may or may not need,
right.
right? During COVID, there was a company called Bossa Nova that created robots that roamed up and down Walmart's aisles, getting panoramic pictures, making them searchable, right? COVID shows up, and we stop shopping. And there are two major value propositions were empty shelf and misplaced items.
Mm,
Well, the pickers would go in there and they would find the empty shelves and they'd give you feedback, and Walmart got that too, right? And nobody would misplace things because nobody's changing their mind. Yeah, they ended a $400 million purchase order for these robots, and they just went away, right?
yeah.
And it just goes away. I mean, and this is a circumstance. This is COVID and everything, right? but you really have to be able to show that there's value there. Otherwise, why would they change?
Yeah, and then the value measured based on cost and time and effort,
Yes.
and yeah, I mean, it's all of those have to be looked at and explored, and it's interesting because the one thing, so it's funny, I think back when I joined AT&T, right? That was 12 years ago. I was at AT&T. I'm like, oof, time flies. But I joined them and I thought, oh, they're so far behind in digital transformation, and they're talking digital first. And I look back now and I'm like, wow, we were actually ahead. We were ahead
At AT&T, you were
at
talking, yeah.
AT&T. And I look back, and the thing that, I mean, every time you do something, you take in a role or do something new, you go, what did I learn from that? I mean, AT&T was the master of, they could tell you how much it costs down to, a button you clicked on the web or on your mobile device, or they could tell you the cost of when you walked in the door and opened it in a storefront. They knew every cost down to the penny. This was 53 cents. This was 12 cents. This was $1.25. Understanding the cost of what it got to get you to that transaction, you can then understand how to unwind the cost. And so
Sure.
it takes a while for people to get that. Well, what did it cost me to do that? How do I get to it? Not everybody tracks down to the minute level of detail. And that was the one thing for me that was a big like aha moment. You've got to track it on the front end and then know how much you're really going to save on the
Right.
back end. And some of it's people, right? The cost of a person per hour.
Sure.
But some of it's also, to your point, it's downstream. Am I restocking? Is there a restocking cost? That's time, that's effort, that's product. So it's just really interesting to think about all those costs and then how you measure the value of it.
Right, and it changes all the time. I mean, like in retail, and they move the shelves, they do different things, and these make enormous changes in both the customers' lives and the cost of just doing those things.
Yeah.
Right, very difficult to really to itemize those things. Well, let's talk about. So you walk into a company that needs improvement. You're looking around, and a smart person like you can probably, when you walk in the door, you can immediately find efficiencies, right? Even if it's automating something in their system that they're doing manually, right? That's really low hanging fruit. But getting them to change, it's really a question of trust, isn't it? I mean, how do you break in and get buy-in, right? I mean, consultants are lined up at the door waiting to help companies, right? And
Yes.
then often they come and go and nothing happens. What happened? I couldn't get buy-in. How do you break through that barrier?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And to your point, it comes down to trust, and trust takes time.
Right.
So and even then, so it's interesting. I had this conversation with someone the other day, right? People have to feel that they're part of the process, and it can't be a person that owns it. It needs to be everybody that owns that thing that's changing. Because if it's a person, then nobody feel, well, that person owns it. That's great. Let them work that out, right? And
Mhm.
they're not bought into it, or how it's going to help them, or how it's going to help the company, and so it's really important to take that time and get them engaged in the process. And it takes a while, so you have to understand
Mhm.
that their perspective, where they're coming from, bring them along for the ride. I mean, not everybody's gonna come along for the ride. It's usually
Right.
a third and a third, a third, and a third. And it doesn't matter where you go, what industry you go to, or what you're changing. There's always a third of the people that are all in. Yep, I'm in. I know this needs to change. Let me help. There's
Right.
a third of the people that say that they're in, but they're in until maybe it impacts them. And they go, oh my gosh, this is gonna.
They cheer the other third on. Right.
And then the last third is like, heck no. Right. And it's just how it works. And it doesn't matter what industry, where you go, what you're changing. It's usually about the same. And so it's, how do you get that middle group to feel ownership and come along? So
Yeah.
it's getting that first group to kind of say, yes, here's my role, here's how I can help. and then getting that second group engaged in part of the process. It's bringing them to meetings, having the open discussion with them,
Right.
having them be part of a trial and testing it and seeing how it works and getting their feedback. And it's definitely not, and if it doesn't work, okay, great, that didn't work. I mean, you also have to say when something doesn't work, that's where you'll gain the trust. It's like, okay, well, we
No
tried
doubt.
that thing didn't work. Let's go try something else. I mean, that's part of the iterative process of why when you do some of these things, you want to don't go spend a bunch of money up front. Go spend, a couple hours, go spend a couple months, try to plan it, test it, do it on a test market. Don't roll it out company wide, test it on a,
Sure.
a handful of processes or markets or whatever it is. And that really makes the difference. Yeah. And I recently did my own transformation, a personal transformation, which was kind of interesting. I helped my parents go from their home they lived in for 63 years to assisted living, right?
Oh,
They're
I'm very familiar with that. It's always the
89 and
daughter's problem,
87.
isn't it? Yeah.
89 and 87. They lived in the same place for 63 years.
Yeah.
They got a lot of stuff, but that's a hard transition. And so
Yeah.
you kind of start with the conversation about maybe why and how it might help them. And then you kind of say, hey, let's try to make some little changes. And so we took my mom's, I'm a clothes freak. I love clothes. I have a
Yeah.
nice collection. I have a collection and my mom, apparently I got it from my mother, but we went through every item that she had, which took a long time. I'd put it on. I'm like, hey, mom, she used to be a different size. I was like, hey, look at this. This is kind of funny, isn't it? Maybe we should get rid of that. Yeah. Oh my gosh, I've had that forever. You're right. It's just going to be way too big. Right. And so but you make them you show them, you try. I
Sure.
mean, we literally spent a week going through every item in her closet. And it was just that focus of the time and energy
Yeah.
and letting her decide and having a laugh about things that didn't work and why she maybe tells stories about why she kept the things. Whether you do it in your personal life or your professional life, that transformation process is the same. And it was something that dawned on me the other day. And I was like, oh my gosh, I've just done transformation on my parents.
No kidding. No kidding. I remember when my father, we went through his dresser, and he had a bottom drawer that was full of shirts still in the package, things we gave him for birthdays for years. He's
It
like,
was
no,
my,
I appreciate all
yeah.
these presents. I just don't need them yet. Oh my God. No, there must have been 20 shirts, collared shirts, still in the package, right? No, that's still good. I'll still use them. He's 90 something years old, right? And
but we all have those things, right, that we've
you,
kept, or the processes that we've kept because
yes,
that's what we know and that's what we're familiar with. And we did that for a reason. That reason may change over time, for a process, but it's something that we've done. And so it's familiarity, it's what we know. And so it's if you can correlate those things to things that people do personally and have
yes.
them kind of bring it into work and understand what they're trying to change, it makes all the world of difference.
Right. Well, it's threatening, isn't it? I mean, somebody like you shows up, they're like, we're going to change things. And when you talk about owning something, it's really owning a problem. What that means is that there's an employee that is responsible for the solution to that problem, right? And if you bring a group together, then they all have a stake in it. But if you're taking that away and someone else is helping them solve that problem, you're taking away some of their responsibility and may feel a little threatened about their longevity in the company. I mean,
Well,
it's very complicated personally.
and it's also like, people that do transformation that tend to do I don't know if I'll ever take, I shouldn't say this out loud, but I'm not sure I'll ever take a role again called a transformation officer. Why? Because it gives it to a person, right? You could have your
Yeah,
head of operations, your chief
right.
operations officer leading the structure, approach, prioritization to the investments for transformation, but the transformation has to happen with the team, with the company, with the employees. Because if you look, right, I've been across multiple industries and there are some
Yes,
similarities of things that you learn across industries, but do I know the exact process for back office loan processing? No, I
right.
don't. I haven't been doing it for 20 or 30 years.
Yeah,
I know how to think through what we might change and how to approach it, but I'm not the expert in loan processing, right? Or
Right.
loan origination. And so part of it is you have to think like they need to own it. You help guide them to find it's more of an orchestrator, which is why I think it's kind of more of a COO role. And I'm
Right.
sorry to all the transformation officers out there, but I really, and even chief digital officer was the same. It's like, okay, is that the new word for CIO? There's CIO, CTO, and then your CDO. And you're like,
You're trying to get past the labels.
yes, it's not the label, it's the what you're doing and how you're
Right.
doing it, not the label. Because I think when somebody's labeled the chief transformation officer, transformation feels like it has a beginning and an end. And the reality is it doesn't. It's
Right.
about how you run and operate your business. And just like technology keeps changing, how you run and operate your business should continue to change as well with technology or with what's happening in the market or the industry or the world. And so it's not a point in time thing. And
Right.
yeah, that's just, I don't know, kind of where I am.
Yeah, well, people, it's really interesting how you put that. I mean, with labels, people like to label each other. Something new comes in, what's the label? Okay, this is my shorthand for that's that person's responsibility, but it's also for how does it affect me?
Right.
And labeling projects, even they have beginning, middles, and ends in their minds, right? Cultural transformation, maybe that's the better. You don't want to have that title,
No,
that probably brings in a lot of other issues, right? But changing the culture of the company, it seems like it really has to start at the top
it
and
does.
not be labeled. But hey, COO or whatever your title is, even CEO, we're changing your processes, right? And that's how it should come out, right? Not as this labeled person who's coming and threatening everybody, right?
Yeah, and to your point,
Yeah.
culture change is every executive's responsibility across the company. So even if you are doing a business transformation, technology transformation, whatever it is, changing culture starts at the top. It has to be everyone. I had a company asked me to come and help them with a transformation, and I said, "Great," or with a culture change.
Right.
Transformation. It was really about culture. And I said, that's great. When we do these sessions, so there was like the second level leadership. So you had like the CEO and the direct reports, and then it was the next level of leaders.
Right.
And I said, great, who's going to be in the meetings with these next level leaders? Like which executives are they rotating through? What are they?
Right.
Oh no, they're not going to be in there. The local market leader's gonna lead it. And I said, yeah, I don't think that's going to work. I
They
said,
don't like the
honestly,
rules.
it's got to start at the top down. It has to
Right.
be the CEO has to say, this is the change that I want. Here's the guidelines by which we're going to do this. This is what we're looking to achieve. Here's why we're doing this. And then his direct reports need to be able to carry that same message. And so it
Yep.
doesn't have to be the CEO, but the direct reports should be out in those markets, be at those meetings, guiding it, hearing the feedback, getting and so it's got to be owned by everybody. Because if it just comes back down to the local market leader saying, yep, this is what we're doing because they said so, it's
It's
like,
their version of it, right?
right. And so it's getting everybody. I mean, the one thing that I've always tried to do, it was most prominent when I was at the bank, is everybody was like, Laura, it's your transformation. We're here to do your transformation. I'm like, no, you're not. You're here to do the company's transformation. And so we all need to know the strategy. We all need to be able to talk to it. We all need to be able to talk to what we're doing and how we're doing it and why we're doing it. And so every one of my direct reports had to be able to tell that story. And then they had their direct reports be able to tell the story. And that way you get everybody's able to say the what, the why, and the how. And if you
Sure.
don't have that, there's no buy-in.
Well, an easy tool is to, everybody has their goals, especially in big companies. They're practically on paper. They're probably still on paper, unfortunately, but you know what I mean? So yeah, they have their goals, but that's when you're talking about really this cultural change and everything, it's beyond goals. I mean, it's easy to say, okay, your goal now is to do this, your portion of this transformation. But what you're talking about is something that is more enveloping, isn't it? I mean, you can't just say it's not an easy solution just by changing goals.
Yeah, it's a way of being, and it's communication. It's constant communication. It's the actions that you take and demonstrating those actions and being there. It really is. It has to be, everybody from the CEO on. It has to be. You could set a goal, but if you don't kind of make everybody own it,
Yeah.
be a part of it, it just won't happen.
Right, right. Well, especially if you're the lone star that's leading it, right? You're constantly selling yourself, and you have to constantly convince people. Constantly, if the CEO, puts her hand down and says, "This is important," she doesn't have to explain why. She doesn't have to convince, right? This is important, and this is going to be what we're changing, right? It helps you because now you've got the blessing, but it's simplistic. I'm explaining something grossly simplistic on you.
Well, I mean, I think even if the CEO says this is what we're changing and why,
Yeah,
you want them to still own it and be a part of it and not just
right.
say, even if they don't, you want them to say why. And you want people to
Sure.
understand the why. Because I think, right, everybody wants to know why they're doing something. Like people want to feel like they're making an impact. So what's the impact of what I'm doing? That's the one
Huh.
thing that through especially when you're doing transformations, people they want to know the why because they want to know the impact. Well, if you do this, we'll save, $10 per transaction, which then means the company saves this, which then means, your stock value goes up by X, right? Or
Impacting the bottom
your
line. Right.
the
Hmm.
profitability ends up going like this, or you're going to make your customers happier by doing XYZ. I mean, so it's interesting, and it also goes back to what you look at and how you look at it. But people want to know. Like we did a deep dive analysis of all of our call center data. And it's like, okay, well, what are you looking for? Well, we can already tell you that most of the calls are about XYZ, and it's like that's just if you look at the raw numbers. If you then go look below those, when we looked at some call center numbers, people were calling because they thought they had fraud, but they weren't. It was actually an education about other people that they've given access to on their credit card, like family members,
Ah,
or they had an automatic renewal, or DBAs, companies that are doing DBAs, and so you don't
sure.
have the actual company name, and you're like, well, what company is that? And so it's education. So now it's like, okay, well, why are we doing this? Well, we're doing this so that we can then figure out how to better serve our customers. Well, what do our customers need? They actually need more education about how to look at their credit card statement or about what fraud is or how to, right? So
Hmm.
it's really just people want to know why. And I think it's great
Sure.
that they want to know why, and that gets their buy-in.
Yeah, and also it sounds like in your process, you're really redefining the problem, right? I mean, everybody's dealing with problem. Problem is actually a bad word to use. You're like, oh, you have all these problems. I think it's like this dark universe, right? That's not what it is. When you're improving something, the problem is you can make it better, but you've got a boundary, you've got a barrier or something, right? And some people might not even know it's there, this human limitation or whatever it is, right? And people like to solve problems. It makes them feel like heroes, little
Yeah.
bit by bit each day, right? Especially in big companies, encouragement, and it's all about positive coaching type of thing, right? Tell me how you incorporate that. How do you motivate people to say, yeah, I want to make this change?
Yeah, I think it goes back to, did they feel like they helped discover what the boundaries were of that problem, right? It's you know,
They're
um,
solving the problem,
they're
right? If
solving
you're
it
the
well.
one who raises your hand and gets to solve the problem, what, you're a hero, right? I mean,
Yeah, well, and they're identifying the problem because
yes,
you're helping them look at things through a different lens, and that's really what
right.
it is. Because, like I said, I don't know every one of these industries that I go into. I learn a ton
Sure.
about them, and I feel great because I feel like I've learned a lot about different industries, but I don't know them in depth. But I know what questions to ask to get people to then answer their own questions. Oh, well, the real problem is this. It's not this, and that's the trick, is about asking questions in from
Right.
a different perspective or a different point of view that maybe they didn't think about, or looking at the data in a different way.
You also, so when you show up fresh from that perspective, right? If the experts ask these questions, right, the people inside, they might be judged, right? You show up, you're like, I've got this dumb question, right? And you're allowed to say that, right? Because
Yeah, because you don't know the industry.
you're still looking through, transformation for dummies, right? You're like, hey, this is all I know. Can you help me out? And they want to help you, right?
Yeah, yeah. So it's like I said, it's actually rewarding. And so when I do transformation work, I still, or I'll say transformation work, COO work.
Right,
um,
right.
I always love to make sure, how's that progressing? I was even checking in on some folks today from a couple of past projects and
Right.
programs. And it's like, yeah, we're making progress. This is really great. We've now rolled this out across the whole company and we're starting to see the benefits of it and the cost reductions. Like, oh, that's fantastic. Right. So you know, if they own it, again, it's not about a person. They own it and it'll succeed. It's sustainable, right?
Yes.
Because
Right.
otherwise, if it's a person, it's not sustainable. And so then it's exciting to actually see people grow, and it helps them rethink as well their career. I had somebody that was in a marketing role that came to me in operations, and I was like, you're really well organized in how you think about things and you understand the broad picture of the company. Why don't you come help me run the overall transformation program? And they were like, that's not really what I do. And I'm like, yeah, but you'd be really good at it. And now they're leading it for the whole company and they've built a team. And I'm like, this is awesome, right?
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's like 2 years later, they're running this big team for leading all the programs across the company, not just technology programs, but all the major programs. So it's like really amazing.
And you hardly saw it germinate. You just kind of planted the seed and you
Yeah,
came back and you saw it, right?
yeah. So that for me is super rewarding.
No kidding. Well, it leaves great examples. That's how you perpetuate this too in the company, because they'll leave the company too, right? I mean, people come and go, and that's how you change the culture, don't you?
Yeah, yeah. It's one person at a time.
Boy, that makes the task sound daunting, walking into a 10,000 employee company, right? Let's start with you. So how do you do that? I mean, you walk in, I'm sure you start at the top. What are the different approaches you use to get the buy-in where you need it?
Yeah, so it's super interesting. I started to mention it before, and so it's this, you know, when we were when you think about, let's say we were doing a transformation, and my direct boards had to be able to talk to the what, the why, and the how, and then they had their direct reports do the same. And what was interesting was that next level of leadership never really saw themselves as the next level of leaders. Like, you as a group of
Huh,
50 people are the next set of leadership. Like, you guys are leaders. You're not
right,
just a silo task doer. And what we did is we brought in this company that did, I'll call it leadership guidance. It basically got all of us on the same page about each other, about what we knew about each other, about how each of us operated, and then did it with the next level of leaders down. So it was just, 10 of us. And then it was the next level down, which it was 40. And then
right,
and that, as soon as those people saw themselves as a leadership team of 40 or 50 people,
right.
that was a game changer, right? Because it never makes it down to middle management. It either is bottom up or top down, but the middle is what gets forgotten. And so it was
Right.
really a neat way to get people to be like, hey, I feel some ownership. This is great. And it changed the conversation with teams that were actually having conflict about each of their roles and what we were trying to change. Um,
Sure.
and I would do that again in a heartbeat, and tell anybody else to do it again in a heartbeat.
Yeah, middle management always has my sympathies. I call it unsmashing the sandwich, right? Because they're getting it from both ends, right? My father worked for an auto company for 38 years, and it's funny. He stayed at the bottom. He's like, I am not going to manage. They're always trying to drag them up. They're like, no, I don't want. I see what they go through, right? And it's difficult. It's also change. It's scary, right? To move up and do something different. And if you show some green fields up there, and that's exactly what you're talking about, you're giving them room, maybe even to fail a little bit, to experiment a little bit, because without that, you're still siloed.
Well, and because you told them they were a leadership team,
Yes.
they weren't a leader of their group. They are a leader of their line of business or their, group within the IT team or whatever.
Right.
But when you told them that they were a leadership team, that changed the dynamics, because now they have two teams. They have the people they directly manage, but they also have these peers that are now their peers, their team members.
Right.
They're not that group over there that does XYZ, or that business unit that I'm competing with.
Yeah.
It's now you guys are a team, and how are you going to achieve this together? And I think it's just a different, people forget that group, I think, quite often is not addressed as, a leadership team. And that's how you get the silos in companies. And I really just feel pretty strongly that if you want to change anything or improve anything, you're not going to get to it unless you get to that group and make themselves see each other as a leadership team.
Well, sure. And it seems like also that, I mean, it's a place where nobody wants to strive to go. And if you make it so that it is, I want to go there, then suddenly they're not just trying to leave, right? To the next step, right? This climbing that corporate ladder, right? You find it sounds like you make it as an attractive place to want to really reach for from the bottom.
Yeah. And you have to, because otherwise people are like, oh, why would I want to do that? It's like, oh, I get to be part of this broader thing that's really changing the company or has an impact. I know I can actually make an impact. Versus I think most people go, middle manager is not sure I can have an impact, and it seems a lot harder. There's a lot to do. No, thanks.
Right. Well, there's a lot of judgment, right? I mean, without giving them something to do or change, it's status quo. There's nothing fun about status quo, right?
Yeah, maybe
There's
a little
comfort
bit.
in it. Maybe there's, at least I know what I'm waking up to, right? But it doesn't have to be pure chaos.
Right, exactly. So I think there's always a balance between status quo and change, but the world is changing, and it's changing at such an accelerated pace. I mean, we've been talking about globalization for a while, but I mean,
Sure.
Globalization and technology and business processes, and I mean, it's changing at rapid speed. Things used to take, new products would launch and it'd take 3 years to get to 1 million users. Now it takes like 3 days or maybe even 3 hours. So,
Right.
the world is different.
It sure is. It sure is. Well, hey, we do talk a lot about, innovation, and this is Innovator Cafe, right? And in my mind, innovation is all about change. You don't innovate to keep doing the same thing.
No.
That's totally contradictory, right? So I hope a lot of our audience, I expect a lot of our audience, they're entrepreneurs and different. And you're talking about people, they could be in startups, starting their own business, redefining themselves. Maybe they're in that smash sandwich. They want to get out and start something on their own, right? Because you can't change everything from within. Startups, and even inside, you could be an innovator in a big company.
Yes.
Right? So how about some final words to those innovators out there and some inspiration on how they can affect their change and start their own personal transformation in their careers?
Yeah, I would say just believe in yourself and know what you know, right? And use that as your leverage. Don't worry about what you don't know. Know what you know and bring that forward, and other people will fill in the gaps. I I have my thing that I'm working on the side, which I'm not really ready to talk about yet, to do my own thing. But by leading with what I know and what I bring to the table, people have been very open to sharing what they know and how maybe look at something through a different lens. And I think whether you're doing innovation inside a company or whether you're that entrepreneur, you got to lead with what you know, and people will fill in the other gaps. And I just think it's really, really important to have that confidence and that comfort, and take that with you wherever you go, whether you're looking for your next job or whether you're going to go start a new company,
Right.
that is probably the most important thing that you can do to be successful.
It sounds like you're coaching a little league baseball team or soccer. I mean, I'm hearing all these parallels, right? You're applying these to business. Very inspirational. Laura, this has been really great, very inspiring. Thanks. And thanks for being on Innovator Cafe.
Absolutely. Thank you for the invitation. It's great to be here.
You've been tuning into Innovator Cafe, the entrepreneur go-to, with your host, attorney Dave Stevens. You can find more episodes on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and the website stevenslawgroup.com. Thank you for your positive reviews, comments, questions, and for sharing this show with others.